offense is back. Yeah, man. How about the Dan Campbell-led Detroit Lions offense, which was firing on all cylinders on Sunday in a 44-22 dominant effort against the Washington Commanders. We're going to talk all about that. It's very interesting what we just saw, and I think very relieving for a lot of Detroit Lions fans. It felt like they had their offense back, and we will discuss that. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's show, I do want to give away some social media plugs really quickly at Castellani2014 on Twitter. We are on TikTok as well. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Available in audio form on Apple Podcasts, available in audio form on Spotify, and you can find us on all of those platforms. Look, no college football this week. Michigan didn't play. Michigan State didn't play. We're going to talk Lions, obviously. We're going to talk a little bit of college hoops. Both Michigan and Michigan State had their seasons begin. Looking forward to talking about this. We're going to try to hammer the college basketball stuff this year. I think we had a lot of success last year, at least on TikTok, with the college basketball stuff, and I think we should have two really good teams in this state. So I'm excited to talk about that. But we are going to start with the Lions, who had a very impressive victory against the Commanders, 44-22, like I said, on a day where the offense was essentially flawless outside of that final drive where they took a knee. I want to say that they scored points on every single possession. They protected Jared Goff. The run game was there. The pass game was there. Everyone got involved. Everyone felt like they had a good day. You got Jamison Williams going in the second half. He was explosive as hell. I mean, he's starting to get play calls for him again. I mean, I don't know how much of it was really his fault. John Morton talked about it, but that is where we're going to start, is with the offense, with the offensive play calling. So, yeah, Dan Campbell was calling plays, and I haven't listened or watched his post-game presser yet to see what his explanation is exactly, or how much he's going to give to John Morton and say, no, we split it or whatever, but it's very clear, at the very least, Dan Campbell was way more involved in the play calling duties on Sunday, and it showed. The offense was dynamic. They did a great job of playing to their strengths. They made sure that Jared Goff was given time to throw. They kept him upright. He felt very comfortable. You weren't seeing the flat-footed throws that you saw in that game against Minnesota. And look, I'll be honest with you, and this is the one negative I'm going to start with, because it was a wonderful effort. Last week's loss was a bad loss. I mean, it was a really bad loss, because I was watching Minnesota on Sunday against Baltimore, a team that the Lions beat on the road with Lamar Jackson. That Minnesota team's just not that great. I mean, JJ is not coming along the way they want him to. He's been inaccurate. He threw 2 picks yesterday, almost had 3. That's a sloppy football team. And I know the Lions have been banged up. They've been banged up on the O-line. They've been banged up in the secondary. But playing at home, that's a tough one to lose. With that said, no team in the NFL over the last several seasons has done a better job of responding after a loss. And I think with any sports team, no matter what sport you watch, the best thing that you can do after a loss is come away from that defeat saying, you know what, ultimately, this is going to be the best thing that could have happened to us. We're going to learn from this experience, and we're going to get better. And ultimately, there's a chance that we look back on that Minnesota game and say that loss had to happen because it forced Dan Campbell to take over play calling duties, and now this offense is back to clicking again. Because what we saw on Sunday was a dominant effort. It's weird. You win by 3 scores. That's a dominant performance in the NFL. It wasn't as close as that, because every time Detroit touched the ball, you knew that they were going to score. If there's any minor complaint, I mean, maybe red zone offense wasn't necessarily great. They settled for some field goals, but as a whole, everyone got involved. It was a remarkable effort, and I think a real testament, and I talked about this in my postgame, but I think one of the really likable things about Dan Campbell and about this Detroit Lions team is the sense of urgency that they have. That we can be halfway through what is, up to this point, a successful season. 5-3, first place in the NFC North. You got all your goals in front of you. And despite the fact that you have had success, your good wasn't good enough. And you made some changes. And your offense went back to looking like the offense that we're familiar with. An offense that has endless weapons and a play caller that knew how to use those weapons. That's fantastic, because especially in Detroit sports, and yeah, I mean, I'm going to throw some shade at the Tigers here a little bit, it gets very frustrating when you know you have the tools, when you feel like you're in position to succeed, and you take your foot off the gas. Or you don't show that sense of urgency that the fans want you to show because, oh, we got to develop this guy. Oh, the time isn't right. Oh, we might have to trade this guy because he's under contract. You always get the impression that Dan Campbell is doing everything possible to put this team in position to be a Super Bowl caliber team. Look, I don't know how it ends, But the fact is, I think there are a lot of coaches in the NFL who would have looked at the last few weeks, looked at the results, and said, everything's going to be fine. We had a couple off performances. It's no big deal. They didn't see it that way. And what you saw on Sunday was an offense that was as fun to watch as any in the NFL. And it's why I really wasn't concerned about this game because, quite frankly, and you give Campbell's staff a ton of credit, right? But this is where Brad Holmes really shines through. At the end of the day, guys, and I know there's injuries. There's some devastating injuries, and they avoided a few more. I mean, you had Penei Sewell, limping off the field and ultimately coming back. I mean, there were some scary moments on Sunday, but ultimately, guys, this roster is just loaded with talent. Even on days when they're depleted, even on days when they have guys who are injured, there's not many rosters in football, if any, that are better and more explosive than this one, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And that showed on Sunday. It was a win you felt like they needed to have. Obviously, you got Philadelphia next. You know that's going to be a really tough game. Potential preview of the NFC Championship game, or at least a playoff matchup. I mean, a team like the Rams or the Seahawks might have something to say about it, but as a whole, hard not to be impressed with that effort. They came out and they played with such a sense of urgency, and it's a reminder of the good era of Lions football that we're living in, because I think that one issue that just would drive me absolutely nuts during the dark times of Lions football was just how mentally soft you felt like they were. And I think very often you put that on the coaching staff or the culture, whatever you want to say. But, there would be these times where the Lions would lose a heartbreaking game to a good team. And you'd say, hey, man, that stinks. But you stayed with them. You stuck with them. It was a hard-fought game. You got an easy one coming up next week. Go out and do your thing. And they would come out and they'd just lay an egg. I remember 2013, there was that game against the Giants. The year the Giants stunk. I think it was on Christmas Eve maybe, or close to Christmas. And they just came out so flat. They had a chance to clinch a playoff berth. They had a chance to win the division. Didn't do it. Completely spit it up. That is not something that you will ever see from a Dan Campbell-led group. They're going to have off days. And you're going to have off days in the NFL. And we saw one last Sunday against Minnesota. But I think in this league especially, the best teams are defined by how they come back after setbacks as opposed to being defined by the setbacks themselves. Not much else to say other than I still, outside of Jake Bates, think that the special teams is a little bit off. You had one big kickoff return and have had some issues over the last few weeks. The defense was not great. Obviously, the secondary being depleted had a lot to do with that. Being without Kirby Joseph is so huge. I mean, that's the ball hawk on your defense. And Branch is obviously a wonderful player, but that 1-2 punch in your secondary is so good because you have Kirby Joseph, who's the ball hawk, who's got the instincts, and you have Branch, who's just the playmaker, right? The heavy hitter, the guy that you don't want to throw to in coverage. And to be without one of those guys is pretty devastating. Didn't think the pass rush was necessarily amazing, but you give Washington some credit. They had a mobile quarterback in Marcus Mariota. They did a good job of making sure that he was getting the ball out pretty quickly. They moved the ball, but I think Detroit early on was pretty aware that if this game became a shootout, which it kind of did, there was no chance that Washington was going to figure out a way to win because Detroit's offense was just that explosive and that good. And now you have an opportunity to truly prove that you are one of the best teams in football by going to Philadelphia and winning. And look, the schedule's been tough and there's been injuries. I understand it, but this is a group that doesn't take anybody lightly. And because of that, they've earned these opportunities to show their worth. You can't look forward to the Philadelphia game before you take full advantage of what you can do against Washington. And that's exactly what they did on Sunday. Really looking forward to that next game. This was a prime encapsulation of all the things that have gone right in the Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes era. Like I said, no college football this most recent weekend. Jonathan Smith still employed by Michigan State. Michigan still 7-2. They didn't lose. You can't lose during a bye week. Here's one thing I will say, and I just want to put this on record, and you guys are welcome to dig it up and tell me that I'm wrong. I think Michigan plays the way that they have over the last two games. That Northwestern game at Wrigley Field is going to be a dogfight. Okay? Northwestern played USC a lot tougher than Michigan did. And I don't know how much correlation there is or how much that, connects to whether or not they're going to play Michigan tough. But I worry anytime I root for a team that I feel like is capable of self-inflicted wounds. And this Michigan team is very capable of that, whether it's the penalties, the lack of discipline, the turnovers, missed throws on offense. It's going to be outside. It's going to be a cold day in Chicago. you're going to have to grind it out. Now, that is where I'm going to continue to give Michigan the advantage, is that I think at a certain point they're going to try to get into a rock fight, and if they get there, but in the second half, I think they will wear them down at the line of scrimmage. But this is a big game coming up for Michigan, not just in terms of how I feel about, that winning this game, which you got to do, but how I feel about the rest of the season, because you had a bye week after what was a very ugly win, an uninspired win against Purdue. You have two opportunities now, one against Northwestern and one against Maryland, just to show us that a team that is capable of competing with Ohio State exists. Because right now, I don't see it. Even last year, as ugly as last year got, you had that game, a game 11 against Northwestern right before Ohio State, where you put up a 50-burger, you played your most complete game of the season. Well, look, Northwestern wasn't some dynamite opponent. I think that performance gave Michigan a lot of confidence and going into Columbus. I need to see another performance like that in these next two games if I want to feel good about the game against Ohio State. And where it starts is the fact that I need you to get your quarterback going. I need to see more production and accuracy from Bryce Underwood. Michigan's going to be able to run the ball, and Jordan Marshall's going to do his thing, and this offensive line is going to do their thing, and you can get away with that against some inferior opponents. You can't get away with that against some of the better teams on your schedule, and you haven't been able to. The two games you've lost, you weren't able to win the line of scrimmage early, you fell behind, and you weren't able to play the brand of football that you want to play. Maybe you can get away with that against Northwestern, but I still need to see a lot more from this ball club, because I think that game has the potential to be a barn burner. I really do, and maybe I'm just fear mongering because I'm kind of down on this team right now. But they nearly lost to Purdue, so at this point, to me, nothing is really off the table in regard to this football team. I want to transition a little bit and talk about college hoops, and college basketball is one that I have a hard time previewing, because I think of all the sports, it's the toughest sport to predict, because there are certain teams that you will see on paper that look great and have a ton of talent, but just don't gel. I mean, the teams that Juwan had were very talented, right? But whether it's coaching, team chemistry, floor spacing, outside shooting, there's a million factors that can lead to a season going sideways, and there's a million factors that can lead to a team ascending and becoming one that you don't want to play in March. And it's very difficult for me to assess a ball club, or in this case, ball clubs, because I do want to talk about Michigan State, based on one or two games of their season. I mean, we're not even halfway through November, but Michigan played one game. Michigan State's played two games, one against a legitimate opponent in Arkansas, though I don't think Colgate's actually that bad, but I want to focus mainly on the Arkansas game. Want to start with Michigan, though, who just ran Oakland out of the gym in really what was kind of a historic offensive performance, and a performance that is actually looking better pretty quickly, in the sense that Oakland went to Purdue and played the Boilermakers very tough in West Lafayette, and we'll see how that win ages, but it was never in doubt, and you knew right away that Michigan was going to be able to win and control this game, because they had a size advantage down low. Merez Johnson, Ade Mara, these guys were fantastic, but this was a wow performance from Michigan, and you don't want to over-assess it, because you are ultimately just one game into the season playing an inferior opponent, but there had been so much talk about the depth that Dusty had built on this roster, and I think in the early part of the season, what you look for are what potential weaknesses could be, because the deeper you get into a season, you're going to be playing better opponents, you're going to go deeper into conference play, and the better opponents with better coaches, they're going to do everything possible to exploit the weaknesses you have. One game for Michigan, they got a game in LCA on Tuesday against Wake Forest. Things, my opinion, could completely change, solely based on one game against Oakland where they shot the lights out of the ball. It is clear that this offense and this team as a whole at their best has a little bit of everything. And regardless of how this season goes, I definitely think that you have to commend Dusty May for knowing exactly what he wants his basketball teams to look like. I think that is a area where the Juwan Howard era really got derailed. And I know there were a lot of issues with the Juwan Howard era, but like I said a minute ago, talent was there. Whether it was going out and getting multiple 4 or 5-star guys or getting good players from the portal, what wasn't there was the connective tissue. It felt like you had pieces that on their own could work, but you put them on a team and they didn't really mesh. I think it's going to be different here. I think they have size. I think they're going to have guys who can drive. I think they're going to have shooters. I was on Ben Bosher's show last week talking about this, and I think Trey McKinney is all of a sudden kind of the X factor. Now, look, a 5-star freshman, he's going to go through it. He's going to have his growing pains. He's not going to make 7 threes every single night, but I think for a first performance it's very clear that there's a whole lot of weapons on this Michigan roster and a whole lot of toys for Dusty May to play with. And especially in year two, there's boxes that you can already check off that you weren't necessarily able to check off before year one. And this wasn't anybody's fault, but in year one, you look at things like culture. You look at, in-game changes, assembling of the roster, floor spacing, even something as small as effort. Like, is this team communicating on defense? Are they switching? And you saw that in year one, and that inspires you about what the future might look like. But now, if what I saw against Oakland is even a fraction of what this team is going to be, this is going to be a club that people are going to be talking about all year. And it does change, and we got a long ways to go. But assuming that happens, it does change the dynamic. Because last year, despite the fact that Michigan revamped their roster and went out and got a bunch of talent, they were still a team that had won 8 games the year before. And every win they had, everything that they accomplished was, a pretty remarkable, because you could look back and say, wow, you're coming off of maybe the worst year in your program's history. Now you're fighting for a Big Ten championship. Now you're winning the Big Ten tournament. Now you're making the Sweet 16. Those accomplishments with this unit, assuming they reach their ceiling or anything close to it, aren't going to be good enough. And with that will come crazy expectations and you getting everyone's best shot. I love Big Ten basketball, and I especially love the makeup of this current Big Ten because I think you have a lot of good coaches, and I think any given night, any team is going to be beatable in this league. Now, if Michigan plays the way they did against Oakland and they're not missing and they're scoring down low and able to score from outside, I mean, they probably won't lose to anybody, but that's very rarely ever going to happen. But up to this point, first game against a mid-major that has a tendency to give teams some problems, right? We've seen Oakland play Michigan State tough plenty of times in the past. This was a very impressive performance. Really excited to see what Dusty May's group has in store going forward. As far as Michigan State is concerned, they played a game against Arkansas that for a November 8th game, the second game of the season, felt like a mid-season Big Ten game between two top 20 teams. And it was two top 25 teams. You had Arkansas, who came in as underdogs, but was number 14 in the country coming into the game. Michigan State at 22. And, with this MSU roster, there's a lot of turnover. You add some guys in the portal, you get a few freshmen, and I didn't come into this year down on them necessarily. The year, honestly, in which I was down on them was probably last year, and they ended up winning the Big Ten and making it to the Elite Eight. So I'm far beyond the point of expecting them to take any sort of downturn. But I wanted to see what their roster looked like, a few games in, and assess what the strengths might be and what the issues might be. I think Tom Izzo-led teams when they've been at their best, have been defined mainly by two things. One, very good guard play. It feels like they always do a great job of producing good point guards, guys who can pass, good scoring guards. I mean, take your pick. Mateen, Kalen Lucas, Cassius Winston. I mean, they've had a bunch. And secondly, it's toughness. It's rebounding. Now, over the last several years, that element hasn't been as good. I think they're going to return to that in 2025, 2026, just because they have so much size down low. And all of a sudden, Cam Ward, this freshman who came in and played, he was the best player on the floor, him and Cohen Carr on Saturday against Arkansas. You're going to have some bigs down low, and you're going to be able to get some instant offense from those guys. I think Kohler's going to continue to progress. Cohen Carr, you see the athletic ability. You can already see that his game has grown. I mean, last year, he came along quite a bit, but I think you're seeing a guy who's much more capable of slashing. The key with Cohen Carr is going to be whether or not he's going to be able to create off the bounce, because he's an explosive player and a tremendous athlete. But if he can, figure out ways to put the ball on the floor and really get to the basket, he'll be a freight train going down the lane. And I think that's kind of his ceiling as a player, as a guy who's going to be really difficult to stop on the drive. Great game against Arkansas, a back-and-forth game, a quad one win against what is currently a top 15 opponent. That's a huge box worth checking off, and you could tell that Izzo was very proud of it as well. If I'm going to point to a few negatives, just in the very early part of the season, last year, this team found production. I mean, Jace Richardson changed the entire campaign, really, with what he was able to do, both beyond the arc and slashing. He was a tremendous scorer. Trey Holloman, as well, was another guy who had the ability to give them buckets when they needed it. Jeremy Fears is running point, and Jeremy Fears as a passer, facilitator, and as a defender, very good. He's going to do a lot of good things for this team. He is not, at least yet, a great scorer. And I think the one thing that Michigan State's going to be yearning for, at least in the early part of the season, and we'll see if it gets fixed and who comes along, I think you're going to see Izzo making a lot of switches, a lot of changes, and a lot of substitutions to try to give guys many opportunities to figure things out at that two-guard position. I don't think anything is really set in stone there, and they're going to need outside shooting at some point. And you saw, against whether it was Colgate or against Arkansas, that reared its ugly head. They were having trouble making outside shots. And look, early in the season, so I'm not going to say that it's going to be a problem both from November all the way through March, but I do think that, the tape is out there now, and up to this point in the season, what teams are going to be looking for is they're going to try to push Michigan State out to the three-point line and make you beat them with outside shooting. Because down low, whether it's Kohler, Cooper, Ward, Cohen Carr, these guys at the block, you get them the ball in space, they're going to be able to score. And they're going to be able to get to the line, and I think they're going to be able to make their free throws. It's going to be the outside shooting that I think will be the big question mark. And look, maybe, I bring up the two-guard position, but maybe Jeremy Fears develops as a scorer. I don't think that's going to happen, at least this year, but if it does, it changes the entire dynamic. But either way, a fun game to watch at Breslin. You could tell that Izzo wanted it going up against Coach Cal, and you could tell Arkansas is going to be quite good. I don't think that's going to be one of those quad one wins that ages poorly. Sometimes that happens. You beat a team early in the campaign, and it turns out, they weren't actually that good. No, Arkansas has definitely committed to basketball under Coach Cal, and they're going to be pretty darn good this year. But on Saturday, they were not better than Michigan State. And so, yeah, we have a lot to look forward to with college basketball in the state this year. I think it should be a lot of fun. Look, when those teams aren't that great, winters are rough here. And winters are still pretty rough here, at least weather-wise. We already got snow this most recent weekend. But I think there's a chance that we see both these teams in the top 10 at the same time at some point this season. I think that these are going to be really fun ball clubs to watch, and I'm looking forward to it. Just to kill some time here, I guess I'll throw this out there. Zach McKinstry and Riley Green won Silver Slugger Awards. I clapped back and gave Riley Green some shit because I find his game kind of maddening. But as a whole, deserving of it. The Silver Slugger, similar to the All-Star stuff, is a little bit weird just because you have to compare it to the other players in the league, and if it's just a down year, then your guy might end up winning it. This year, Glaber was excellent in the first half, but when you looked at his numbers, nothing stood out, but it was a weak year for second baseman in the American League, and so he started the All-Star game. That's what happens. The deeper we get, the more discussions I'm going to have about the Tigers and what the future looks like and what the offseason should look like. I've already stated my piece. I've gone beyond the point, not necessarily of getting angry, but I don't think I can officially be disappointed in off seasons anymore. I think we've had a decade of underwhelming moves, a decade of whatever signings and trades, and I think there will be more of that here in 2025. And I hope I'm wrong, but the fact that we're already talking about trading Skubal just kind of gives me thought that this probably isn't going to end super well, but I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. All right, like I said, a little bit of a shorter show, though I feel like we covered enough ground. I feel like we gave you guys enough of what we want. You follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We have hit over 12,000 followers on the TikTok, on YouTube as well. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You want to listen to us in audio form, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. Of course, shout out to my friend and producer, Austin Sisler, who continues to get the job done as my producer. Look, and I've talked to Austin about this. The next few weeks, I'll say this is going to continue. We're trying to get guests for Chris and company. Something in my brain has kind of flipped a little bit, and I don't even think it's a negative thing, but with baseball season being over, there's some evaluation that needs to be had. You guys know what I want to do. You know what I love. But I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to go down any sort of sad path here. We're in a good place. We're continuing to grind. We're continuing to grow, and I look forward to discussing content with all you guys. It's my favorite thing that I get to do. So greatly appreciate it. I will talk to y'all again real soon. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.